Over-editing your photos is an easy problem to succumb to. As you're processing your raw files incrementally, it's so easy just to push things a tad too far. So we're going to take a look at 5 of the areas where photographers typically over-edit and just highlight the issues so that you can avoid them in the future. So here I have a completely processed raw file, and we're going to tweak some of the settings so that we can see how over-processing causes further issues. So the first one that we're going to look at is white balance. And with white balance, what you're ultimately aiming to achieve is a correct white balance that matches the scene at the point of shooting. Of course, you can push the temperature slider or the tint slider slightly further than the natural color balance of the scene actually displayed, but you can't go too far. So if we just have a play with the temperature slider here, so this image was taken kind of mid to late afternoon, so the light was quite neutral, although there was a hint of warmth. And sometimes people like to increase the temperature to make shots warmer and accentuate the sunrise or the sunset, or to make a shot like this look like it was taken later in the day. But the problem with this is that the color balance becomes completely unnatural. If you are going to push your white balance above and beyond the level around which it was originally taken, you have to do with lots of care. So another quick and simple issue that people often come up against is increasing their contrast too much. So as I increase the contrast slider here, you'll see that we're losing detail in the shadows and the highlights. Areas of continuous tone become patchy and banding can occur, and also the saturation has increased massively. Of course, there are situations where having a huge amount of contrast works really well, but for the majority of images, maintaining a natural look is the best way. So I have actually added my contrast with the tone curve here, and just a small amount is absolutely perfect. So another area where people sometimes go wrong is with the highlights and the shadows. So I'm just going to zero out all of these settings here. Sometimes there can be a tendency to bring the highlights all the way over to the left and the shadows all the way over to the right. And what you end up with is a really kind of fake, washed out, pseudo HDR look. You can recover some of this kind of muddiness by increasing the blacks and the white sliders. But as you'll see there, the end result is very similar to my original image, although detail has been diminished and things still look quite washed out. So just taking these sliders to medium amounts will produce the best results. And another area where we often see problems is in sharpening. So here I have the image set to the default amount of sharpening that Lightroom applies automatically. And the image looks absolutely fine. There is no point in adding any more sharpening. If you've taken a shot that isn't 100% sharp, you're never going to make it sharp by increasing the amount slider. The problem with increasing the sharpness too much, and I'm just going to take it all the way up to the maximum of 150 so you can see, is that we start picking up the texture of the grain in the shot. So it just looks over sharpened and we're picking up a completely unnatural texture. In some situations you can even create halos. There's a very subtle halo along the edge there, and while the image may be sharper, it's also picking up lots of other artifacts that just do not work. So remaining within a realistic amount of sharpening is the best way. So if I wanted to increase the sharpening for this shot, of course I have these other sliders that I could work with, but we're just going to look at the amount for now. I probably wouldn't take this any further than about 50 because I can see very quickly that that texture is picked up. But because the shot is sharp, the default amount of sharpening that Lightroom applies works perfectly. Another issue that is quite common is where people use too much strength in their vignettes. Here we're going to use the post-crop vignette, and even bringing that down to -40 is just too strong. It doesn't really work, even though the composition would benefit from a vignette. This is way too strong. We can, of course, change the overall strength using these options here, but for this shot, I would probably only take the vignette down to something around about -20 maximum, possibly even down to -15, because if we take that slider over too far, it just looks absolutely terrible. So let's just get that back down to 0. And just as a bonus tip, another area where too much causes problems is with the clarity. So clarity is often best applied between 0 and about 30. Clarity is simply mid-tone contrast, and as you'll see, as I take that over to 100, it's accentuating the detail by increasing the contrast in the mid-tones. But the problem is it creates uneven tones and dark patches, and it just looks like you've taken the clarity slider over too far. So there are some of the ways that images can be over-processed, and of course things to look out for while you're processing your shots so that your images do not suffer from those problems.